avoid that sexual harassment in the workplace continues to exist, especially when it comes to women. Women need to work, and the issue of sexual harassment forces girls to give in to the pressure in order to retain their jobs. So the women parliamentarians will work with the workers' union since we received guidelines from the International Labour Organization. We think that the model law should be adopted based on the explanation presented by Madam Eva and other contributions presented here. The model law should be adopted by SADC member states. We should study it and see to what extent this model law can assist us in the fight against GBV. It is such an important law. I would like to urge all member states in order to adopt the model law on GBV, to study it and to continue discussions, because GBV is indeed a major scourge for most countries. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to urge member states in order to continue discussing on this law, to adopt it, to help us solve some of the persistent concerns within member states. I would like to pose a question. There are some situations where GBV leaves a situation where the victims become disabled. The honorable member's microphone is now muted.
Honorable Nascimento, are you done? You are muted, Honorable Nascimento.
Sim, mas esteve desligado o tempo todo? Não. Não viu a questão que eu coloquei. Pois, a questão que eu coloquei foi...
I was posing a question. If the model law has any articles relating to victims. Many are times that victims become disabled or they suffer severe injuries. I saw a certain situation that happened in Mozambique, whereby a victim lost an eye. We need to look at these problems in a comprehensive manner, because the perpetrators should be forced to compensate the victims. I would like to pose this question because I don't know if the law has taken this matter into consideration. Thank you very much. I submit.
Thank you very much. Yes, yeah. We have picked the question now. We now move to Botswana. Honorable Talita.
Thank you, Chair. And let me thank the presenter for the very good presentation on this GBV model law. It was very good, since the country, Botswana, is really working very hard on this. What I will just say is that we can see that most of women, they face GBV seriously because of unemployment. We know most of men, they get jobs from the mines, and lots of women are not working. And women face this because especially when they are looking for the jobs. That's when they will get this sexual harassment. And at the end, when they get that job through that sexual harassment, and when they report, it's very difficult for them. I don't know, as a member of parliament, I don't know how I can work on that. Another thing, we know that COVID-19 has really affected most of women because of unemployment, especially sex workers. And when they do their work of the sex workers, men, they don't pay them. And it's a big problem to them, especially in our country. I'll also ask something with the presenter that, you know, in our country, we have got a little bit of a problem. You know, I'm a member of parliament from a rural villages, but in our country, most of small villages, we call them settlements, where a village has got maybe 800 people or 500 people. Most of those areas in Botswana, they don't have police officers. And that's where you will see a lot of GBV there, you know, in those areas. And the handling of the cases of GBV is very poor. So how do we work with that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable. We move to Seychelles. That will be the last member in this round of questions, and then we hand over to our drafter, Honorable Esperon. Honorable Esperon, are you in the meeting? You have the floor. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, you can hear me now? I'm
Sure.
saying thank you, Kurasha, and good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to point out a small issue. Let me, first of all, add my voice to congratulate Madam Eva for her enriching and well. I would like to point out one issue. While going through the draft, some things that on page 13 of the draft, let us say, I can read it out in the draft, and it was also highlighted.
You are like fading. Maybe you can start. I didn't
In the
get
presentation.
It. Yeah.
Where it's tend to restate some of the human rights that directly impact gender.
Honorable Esperon.
Gender-based violence. My question here is, some of the human rights and not all the human rights that are. Yes, Kurasha?
Yes, we have been losing you part of the time. And since you are asking a very pointed question, may we request that you try and retake that again so that the drafter is able to hear you?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes, I was saying on page 13 of the draft. It's the last paragraph in 1.2.4, where it directly impact gender-based violence. My question here is, why are we saying that to restate some of the human rights, not all the human rights that impacts on the gender-based violence?
Thank you very much.
Why is it that we are not pointing out to all the human rights? On the gender-based violence. This is my question. And secondly, Kurasha, I just wanted to point out that do we consider financial conflict can financial conflict in the family, knowing that maybe, you know, some of the women are now employed because as a taboo, in some culture, the women are now more by some culture.
Honorable Esperon,
Yes.
we are still breaking part of the time, and it will be difficult for the drafter to hear you clearly. Would you mind sending the question in the chat box?
Okay.
The second question in particular, I'm sure the first one, Madam Eva
You're hearing
would
me
have
now?
heard you. Sure. Could you just post the question in the chat box?
Just type the question.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you
okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Sure. Over to
You're
you,
welcome.
Madam Eva. We will capture the second question and hand it over to you, Madam Eva, when it has been pasted.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much to those that have commented. Let me start with Zimbabwe. Yes, so we have taken note of all the issues relating to sexual harassment at workplaces, as this is really pregnant. And I'm glad that it has come out in this particular session because it's a concern of many member states, honorable member. And we have tried as much as possible to include a number of provisions relating to sexual harassment at places of work. We really went to a great extent, both in terms of access to justice and response, effective response to GBV cases. So we've dealt with it, and the same issue came up with nearly all the commenters. I think even Botswana raised it, and Madame from the Seychelles also raised it. These issues, we made sure, and Zimbabwe too, we made sure that in the GBV model law, that once a sexual harassment case is reported, there should be no victimization or retribution against the person reporting. We've made sure that the complaint procedures, which will be mandatory for all companies, should be simple and straightforward, with an appeals process also provided. So we've dealt with the issue of sexual violence or sexual harassment in places of work very thoroughly in the model law, because we've realized, as you rightly said, that it's becoming so prevalent, so profound, that it injures the dignity of mainly the female employee. So thank you very much for that. If need be, we'll relook at the provisions and tighten them to ensure that we deal very effectively with this issue of sexual harassment at places of work. Unfortunately, Honorable Regina from the Seychelles, I didn't get the last part in relation to financial conflict since women are now employed. So when you finish dealing with putting it on the chat, then I'll look at it at that stage. Coming now to Angola. Thank you very much. And we appreciate that the fact that you do recognize that education and continued discussion is very important in the fight against GBV. As we pointed out in the presentation, it's not only about the violence, it's also about educating, advocacy, public awareness. Those are the strategies, the interventions that are needed in the fight against gender-based violence. I've dealt with the issue of the field. And then another important issue that you raised is whether there's an article in the GBV model law on what happens to victims who become disabled or suffer some other injuries. Have we covered these in the GBV model law? Yes, we have. We've extensively put into the GBV model law provisions on compensation and restitution, either by the perpetrator or the state. So if you read the provisions under access to justice, you find these clearly stated. Botswana, Honorable Talita, who is eagerly waiting for the GBV model law to assist them come up with their own national laws. I've dealt with the issue of sexual harassment. And then she raised another poignant question relating to rural women, women living in villages where they hardly have any police officers. And as a result, there's a lot of GBV going on in those areas and poor handling of GBV cases. Yes, we've tried to handle this scenario under the human rights part, where we urge governments to put in place special measures and interventions in dealing with GBV in rural areas and protecting the rights of rural women and enhancing the economic empowerment. We've done that. We've also done it in the part dealing with protection and prevention. What measures should put in place in relation to how many shelters and other protective places should be in all parts of member states' jurisdictions. I think I've answered all of them, Mr. Moderator. I think I've tackled all the issues because I tackled sexual harassment together for all the countries.
Sure, thank you very much. Legal drafter. The Honorable Esperance's question is, would we consider if conflict that arises within the family as a form of violence that can impact on the family and be a root cause for GBV?
Mr. Chair, all that we've dealt with under the issues dealing with the dominance factor. The dominance factor. Most men feel threatened, yes, when women are employed and can stand on their own without too much dependence on them. So they feel threatened and they start the abuse process, whether it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, and so forth. It does happen, and it is a form of GBV, which needs serious consideration, and it must be dealt with a force that we can employ against it. So yes, we have done, and yes, it is a form of GBV, all emanating from the dominance factor. So we have dealt with it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much once more. Honorable members, we are open for the next round of questions. If there are any, please indicate by raising your hand. Honorable members are also free to post their questions and comments in the chat box. I do not see a hand at the moment. Honorable members, are there any further questions?
Mr. Moderator, according to your program,
Sure.
it's supposed to be at lunch now,
Sure.
but
Sure.
we have exceeded the time.
Sure. I just wanted to be sure that no honorable members with burning questions are left out. In the absence of any further questions in this section, may I convene at 1:30? So, honorable members, let's reconvene at 1:30. Honorable Esperon, is that a fresh question, or I mean fresh hand, or is the hand that from the last time when you spoke? I presume it's an old hand, and at this juncture, honorable members, let's adjourn and reconvene at 1:30. Members are free to exit and re-log in, or to stay logged in until we resume again at 1:30. See you at 1:30. Thank you very much.
of that household, spouse or former spouse, and violence against or between heterosexuals, lesbians, bisexuals, homosexuals, transgender persons, same-sex persons, non-binary persons, and sex workers. The model law also deals with conflicts and review of national laws. And it's we basically state that where there are conflicts or inconsistencies between customary, religious, and statutory law must prevail, and the matter must be resolved with respect to the human rights of the victim and to gender equality standards. Where there are conflicts or inconsistencies between gender-based violence laws with laws relating to family and divorce, property, housing, social security, and employment, the gender-based violence laws must prevail, and the legal framework that promotes women's human rights and gender equality and the elimination of violence against women must apply. Further, we state that the processing of a case under customary or religious law must not preclude it from being brought before the formal justice system. Member states must amend any provisions of its laws, such as family and divorce laws, property laws, housing laws, social security laws, and employment laws that contradict or are inconsistent with this model law or any law on gender-based violence, so as to ensure a consistent legal framework that promotes women's human rights and gender equality and eliminates gender-based violence. In this case, we urge, In this case, we urge member states in the model law to eliminate gender bias and ensure justice and fairness are accorded to victims in a manner that ensures dignity, protection, and respect. Again, if you look at what I said earlier, we provide for extraterritorial jurisdiction of national laws. So a member state must ensure that any law on gender-based violence shall have an extraterritorial effect so as to meaningfully give effect to certain obligations and commitments made by the member state under international instruments relating to gender-based violence. The law shall apply to any offense committed outside the territory of the member state when the offense is committed by a national of another member state, by a stateless person who has his or her habitual residence in a member state at the time of the commission of the offense, or against a victim who is a national of a member state. Then we also put in provisions under a heading on objectives. What are the objectives? What are the aims of the model law? There are many, but I've just put down a few just to enlighten you. You can read the others. The objectives of this model law are to provide sets of concepts, principles, standards, measures, and interventions to assist member states to develop policies that support the enactment of efficacious and comprehensive national laws on gender-based violence. For example, provide prohibitions with respect to gender-based violence, access to justice, procedural fairness, measures, strategies, and interventions in key areas relating to gender-based violence without usurping the powers of national legislatures or national executives to initiate and enact national laws in their areas of competence and jurisdictions. Provide for legal rights, secure legal protections, and legal recourse for victims. As I said, the objectives are very long, they are very profound, they are far-reaching, and we urge all of you to understand them so as to ensure that when legislation comes before you, those objectives are also included and operationalized within the law. We have a provision on interpretation, which is the interpretation sections. This section defines keywords and terms used in the GBV model law. The majority of definitions are derived from international agreements and instruments, as I explained in the morning. The GBV model law defines as broadly as possible what GBV is, to include all its underlying components as defined by the UN and SADC definitions, including all its subcomponents, such as sexual assault, marital rape, harassment, rape, beating, insults, tormenting, statelessness, trafficking, terrorism, kidnapping, slavery, persecution, refugees and asylum seekers, displacements as a result of war and disasters, and all forms of exploitation. So it is quite extensive, the definition of GBV. Three core issues in this respect we wish you to note, honorable members, is that when we define a term, then we ensure that the term is expanded for the avoidance of doubt, so that we don't leave anything out. We don't inadvertently create a gap. We want to seal all lacunas insofar as the definitions are concerned. So for example, we define victim as meaning a person who has been subject to gender-based violence or discrimination and who individually or collectively has suffered harm, including physical or mental injury, emotional suffering, economic loss, or substantial impairment of their fundamental rights through acts or omissions that are in violation of criminal laws, proscribing abuse of power, employment laws, or gender equity and equality laws in force in a member state, including a survivor, and the word survivor shall be construed accordingly. So you can see it encompasses and takes into account the definition of GBV itself. Then another, without bringing out any doubts as to the extent or scope of the definition of gender-based violence, we expand on it in another paragraph by providing as follows. Gender-based violence, the definition of gender-based violence will include the following: domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, including sexual assault and sexual harassment, harmful practices, including early marriage, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, female infanticide, prenatal sex selection, virginity testing, HIV/AIDS cleansing, honor crimes, acid attacks, crimes committed in relation to bride price and dowry, maltreatment of widows, forced pregnancy, and trying women for sorcery or witchcraft, femicide, trafficking, and sexual slavery. We didn't want anything to be left out. We could have used the generic definition as provided by the UN and SADC, but what we did is combine the two, then made sure we inserted without doubt clause to ensure that everyone can see the extent of the definition of GBV. So for purposes of the definition of victim, you saw how we defined victim, then we expanded it again to ensure safety, that we don't leave anyone out, and defined it as a person who has been subject to gender-based violence or discrimination shall be a victim, regardless of whether the perpetrator is identified, apprehended, prosecuted, or convicted, or there is a familial relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. And where appropriate, it includes the immediate family or dependents of the victim and persons who have suffered harm in intervening or assisting the victim or in trying to prevent victimization. So that's how we've dealt with nearly all the definitions. We made sure that they were tight and there could be no excuse as to what we mean by GBV or a victim. The model law also has an application and jurisdiction provision, which basically provides that the GBV model law includes a broad application and jurisdictional coverage. So we made sure that the coverage is an effective coverage. It is imperative that national laws on GBV ensure a wide application and scope of the GBV laws to cover all appropriate persons, things, and circumstances, and provide for territorial as well as extraterritorial jurisdiction, as some of the crimes committed will be transnational. So you can see the coverage is very effective, and these become explicit when you actually look at the actual provision dealing with application and jurisdiction. And for purposes of extradition, mutual assistance in criminal matters, and exchange of prisoners, most SADC member states have laws relating to these matters, which may be cross-referenced in national laws on GBV for efficacious implementation of the GBV laws. Yes, the model law will not deal extensively, and you won't find extensive provisions in the model law dealing, for example, with trafficking, with extradition, with mutual assistance in criminal matters. But we have explained it that the drafter must cross-reference to these laws which are already existing on your statute books to be more effective. Otherwise, we would have a 4,000, 5,000 GBV model law, which will not be user-friendly, and most people don't read such long documents. So those are issues which we have dealt with in the preliminary part, and I've just made it easier to understand. But I would urge you to read it thoroughly, because once you understand the interpretation section, then it will be easier to understand the rest of the law. It gives you a bird's eye view and a very in-depth understanding of words and terms that will make understanding or communicating the law much, much easier. Then in part 3, we deal with the human rights-based approach and policy directions. So what are we doing in this part? What we are doing is simply ensuring that effective domestication is achieved and major provisions in regional and international instruments are incorporated on gender equity, equality, and violence. And when you look at the actual provisions, you'll see that we've actually dealt with these components in the law: equity, equality, and violence. So we've got specific provision in relation to these. Some human rights are restated to achieve a human rights-based approach to effectively deal with GBV as committed to by member states under various human rights instruments. In fact, I forgot to answer, I think it was the honorable member from Angola who asked this question as to why on page 30, we talk about some human rights. We've selected the most impacting instruments on human rights in relation to GBV. That's what we've done. Obviously, there are a number of them, and there's a number of provisions dealing with the human rights-based approach in dealing with GBV. It's impossible to include everything. As I said, the law would be too long. So we did a selective number as indicative to you as member states as to the direction you should take when using the human rights-based approach. So this is in no way exhaustive, and we've explained it in relation to that by saying that your drafters can include as many human rights as is possible that will help the fight against GBV. Even in the preamble, you may cite, or in your domestication process, you may cite or deal with many other international conventions and treaties and protocols, which we may not have cited. We've selected those which have a direct impact on GBV and which will be indicative to member states as to where to look for any others that may have been lost during research or during drafting. But you may bring them in. There's nothing to stop you looking at the full expanse of human rights instruments when you are finally drafting your own national laws on GBV. So the following are indicative, as I said, of some of the rights that are restated in the GBV border law, but SMS may include, as I said, more rights as is appropriate or desired. So these are the ones. So you see the ones we've concentrated on: the right to life and human dignity, protection from inhuman treatment, right to security of the person, the right not to be held in slavery and servitude and not to be subjected to forced labor, the right to access information and social and economic services, the rights of asylum, the right to a nationality, the right to access and have justice, remedy, and legal aid, the right to gender equality and equity, the rights to health, healthcare, and sexual reproductive health care, and prohibition of all forms of discrimination in all social and economic sectors, political affairs, and governance in all spheres of life. So these are just indicative. So you can incorporate them and incorporate others. Okay. We also deal in this part with the policy direction that governments must take in order to ensure effective operationalization of their national laws. So whilst restating the above rights and prohibitions, the GBV model law also guides member states, authorities to develop policies and strategies that can effectively eliminate GBV and execute administrative acts, provide appropriate services, and interpret GBV laws more effectively. For example, member states are encouraged in the law to pursue the following policy objectives: promote the equal representation and participation of all gender at all levels and sectors of decision-making, and ensure that gender is championed in all agenda. So you can see we are trying to be very broad in the manner we treat GBV at a policy level. Ensure gender mainstreaming into all policies, structures, systems, programs, and activities in order to make them gender responsive, transformative, and contribute to the effective achievement of sustainable social, economic, and political development. Take appropriate steps to modify or abolish existing laws that are discriminatory or non-inclusive, harmful stereotypes, customs, and practices which discriminate against women, including the girl child, adolescent girls, and young women. So all these are policy directions that the state should be looking at. Develop an integrated framework for the empowerment of women, including the girl child, adolescent girls, and young women, and monitor the implementation of laws, policies, and programs that affect or have an impact on women, including the girl child, adolescent girls, and young women. So without good policies from which laws emanate, then you cannot have solid foundations for our laws, which will be operationalized at an administrative level. So it starts at the administrative level, enacted by the legislator, and it goes back into the administrative level for implementation. So we need firm ground on which the laws are built on, so they can be practicable and implementable. That's why we provide for policies in this model law. So it's a special type of law. It's not the ordinary day-to-day act of parliament. It's jam-packed with directory issues to enable the substantive provisions to be enforced, and enables the entire content of your national laws to be operationalized. So it always points you to solutions. And that's why model laws are the best tool to assist member states develop not only an act of parliament, but regulations and implementation tools in the form of strategies, interventions, and programs to help fight the scourge of GBV. So if you look closely at the model law, you will note that we have taken into account particular issues relating to your obligations as member states at international and regional level, including plans and strategies, platforms of action, and so forth. And in so doing, we've targeted the following: programs. The 1997 SADC Declaration on Gender and Development and its 1998 Addendum on Prevention and Eradication of Violence Against Women. We've looked at the revised SADC Protocol on Gender and Development, the SADC Strategy and Framework of Action for Addressing Gender-Based Violence, SADC Strategy to Address Gender-Based Violence in Situations of Armed or Other Forms of Conflict, the 10-year SADC Strategic Plan of Action on combating trafficking in persons, especially women and children, the SADC Strategy on Women, Peace and Security. So you can see we've contextualized the model law in terms of your obligation at regional level. So we have not made up certain issues. We have followed the SADC path in achieving the objectives under all these declarations, protocols, and action plans. We've then gone further at international level and looked at what you've signed off on and the obligations in these international treaties and protocols, which directly hit GBV. And these are the ones. I won't read them out. I'm sure you'll be able to go and read them yourselves because we don't have enough time. So you can see how many we had to look at. There are so many, and there may be some which we haven't even touched on. So there's a lot of work for member states to go and do and closely work with ministries of justice, gender, and draftspersons. Some notable provisions under this part are as follows. We've dealt with discrimination, and this is how we've sort of defined it in the context of the part. So it's if a person who performs, first we defined it, and then we actually, if you look at the model law, we have defined it and provided for it, and then we went further to provide for its operationalization. So this is what we did. If a person who performs any function or exercises any power of a competent authority, law enforcement, judicial institution, an appropriate authority, a service provider, traditional or local leader, who contravenes subsection 1, which deals with prohibiting discrimination. So we prohibited discrimination and then operationalized it in this manner by providing a sanction. The person shall immediately be arraigned and appropriate punishment be imposed on that person in accordance with the law. So we made sure that whoever does not perform their functions in accordance with the prohibition that we have put must be dealt with, must be dealt with. We've also provided that the government shall enact laws prohibiting all forms of discrimination in the performance of public or private functions or exercise of public or private powers, including prohibiting of discrimination in economic and social life or activities, even in accessing official documentation, such as national identity documents, health records, and qualification certificates. So we've covered the full expanse of the areas where discrimination normally occurs or is perpetrated in education and vocational training, learning and guidance, in and at places of employment and recruitment, retentions, promotions, dismissals, and payment of remuneration and allowances, in the provision of health services and healthcare, and as otherwise provided in the model law. So you see this we've targeted specifically because we believe that that's where the most and profound discrimination takes place. But this does not stop you as member states looking at special areas in your own jurisdictions where you feel discrimination takes place. Then we dealt with the right to life by merely stating that a person has the right to life. Has a right to life. But GBV, people get killed in all sorts of manner. A member state shall ensure through law, and in particular, where a person is deprived of life because of a gender-based offense, that the perpetrator is sentenced to the maximum possible penalty provided for that offense. A court shall not impose a sentence of death. So you can see, we state the right, and then we relate it to GBV. In your constitutions, you'll find that what appears is only the first one. A person has a right to life. In this GBV law, we related the right to life to the crime of GBV. Then another key area that we've provided for is protection from gender-based violence, because that's the core of this model law. So we had a special provision under the human rights part dealing with protection. And we've simply stated that a person shall not be subjected to any form of gender-based violence, including being sold, enslaved, trafficked, or abducted by any person. And you'll note that in your constitutions, all these are rights and freedoms which are embedded in the constitutions. A woman and a child shall not be subjected to any form of gender-based violence. Here again, we've stepped up the ladder by dealing specifically and specially, with a woman and a child. So a child obviously here can include a boy child. It's both a boy child and a girl child. They are all children. Women have the right to refuse sexual acts, including acts within marriage and relationships that put the woman at risk of infection, such as HIV or other sexually transmitted infection, and has the right to refuse any act not desirable by her. If she doesn't want to have sex, then you can't force her. And such refusal shall not be a ground for divorce. Another provision relates to marriage and cohabitation and states marriage, cohabitation, or a romantic or intimate relationship shall not constitute a defense to a charge of marital rape or any other form of gender-based violence. Then we come down now to the policy level, which will support the human rights level, and we provide again that the government shall put in place policies and special measures, including those outlined in this model law, to ensure that women and girls are accorded protection from gender-based violence. Necessary support is given to women and girls for the prevention, identification, reporting, referral, investigation, rehabilitation, and treatment of injury or illness resulting from gender-based violence. I think Angola, you can see your concern has been fully captured under this particular section. Necessary support is given to women and girls for the prevention, identification, reporting, referral, investigation, rehabilitation, and treatment of injury or illness resulting from gender-based violence. Laws against domestic violence give adequate protection to women and children and respect their bodily integrity and dignity. And you can see the force of emphasis on GBV using the human rights-based approach. Laws on marriage provide, and this we are saying the government must provide for policies. Remember from the chapeau that we started with, laws on marriage provide that no marriage shall take place without the free and full consent of both parties, and that the minimum age of marriage is 18 years. Laws on gender-based violence provide effective legal penal sanctions, civil remedies, and compensatory provisions to protect women against all kinds of gender-based violence. Violence against women is condemned by all, and no competent authority, judicial institution, or traditional authority invokes custom, tradition, or religion to avoid obligations to eliminate gender-based violence. Laws on gender-based violence provide mechanisms for access to justice and include civil, labor, and administrative sanctions to redress the wrongs caused to victims and provide for the rehabilitation of perpetrators. So all these should go in a policy to support a law on gender-based violence, including secondary victimization of women. We've got a provision again on protection from inhuman treatment and security of persons, which you can read because it's very similar to what is contained in your constitutions. Women should never be degraded or be subjected to inhuman treatment. Then at the last part, the last section in the part on human rights, we have a general policy direction inserted therein. And this is to make the government aware that it has to take up and put in place policies to help operationalize the law on gender-based violence. So we have stated there that the government shall develop gender-based violence policies and strategic implementation plans, incorporating response, preventative, supportive, and protective measures specified in this model law. And you shall see we've dealt with all these 4 areas profoundly later on. So including the following: promoting equal representation and participation of women and men at all levels and sectors of decision-making, and ensuring that gender is championed in all agenda. Enacting nationality laws, incorporating proper safeguards on nationality and other laws adequately protecting refugees and stateless persons. Ensuring gender mainstreaming into all policies, structures, systems, and programs and activities in order to make them gender responsive and contribute to the effective achievement of sustainable socioeconomic and political development. And taking appropriate steps to modify or abolish existing laws, customs, and religions. Developing an integrated framework for the empowerment of women, monitoring the implementation of laws, policies, and programs that affect or have an impact on women, providing funds for and contributing towards establishing comprehensive and integrated facilities to assist victims, providing adequate support to the children of victims, ensuring that location of such support services allow equitable access to the services provided, in particular by urban and rural populations. So Botswana, you can see that we have also given a direction to governments to ensure that the policies they come up with ensure access to various services, including policing in rural areas, so that the fight against GBV is effective, and then providing access to healthcare and reproductive healthcare. So that's the way we approach GBV, using the human rights-based approach. So it was by stating the GBV, I mean the human rights attaching or impacting on GBV, providing policy direction, and then actually obligating government to put in place certain policy in crucial areas that will ensure empowerment and safety of victims and women and children. So that's how we approached it, in a very holistic, a bit complex, but it's done in such a way as to ensure effective implementation of the law. Then in part 4, we dealt with access to justice. Again, I'll simply explain what we have put in that part, and then just show you 1 or 2 key provisions. So in this part, we provide for access to justice and procedural protections. So a victim has a right to access justice in the manner stipulated in part 3 of the model law, which is very, very extensive. And I think that's our core part, because we've dealt with so many issues to ensure that we close nearly every loophole that has existed so far in the fight against GBV. So the GBV model law mainly incorporates the requirements as stipulated in some of your own laws, international, regional, and continental instruments, and recommendations made in research documents by protagonists. Further, this part incorporates throughout the entire proceedings the rights of victims, which is core to fighting GBV. The rights of victims. Some of these are as follows: the right to reasonable, accurate, and timely notice of any judicial institution, proceedings, or parole proceedings involving the crime of GBV, or any release or escape of an accused. The victim's right to be informed of their rights, remedies, and victim support services, and on how to obtain them, in addition to information about their role and opportunities to participate in judicial and quasi-judicial proceedings. Meaning we have taken a survivor-centered approach in dealing with access to justice. Another right that we've included is the right to seek restitution from the offender or compensation from the state. So Madam, from Angola, you can see we have actually emphasized these issues that you are very concerned with. And we appreciate that concern, because when we are looking at the model law for finalization, we'll see how we can tighten such provisions and make them even clearer. The right to safety and privacy, and to be free from hardship during the dictation, investigation, and prosecution process, which requires legal provisions to ensure the safety, privacy, and dignity of victims and their families at all stages of the criminal justice process. such as witness and victim protection programs, measures to exclude the public from the courtroom, use of testimonial aids like screens or CCTV, and support persons. The prohibition to publish the victim's name or other intimate details. Access to free legal aid and judicial and administrative support, including interpretation services for all. And this also includes asylum seekers, refugees, stateless persons, and persons without documentation. So in the GBV provisions themselves, we have not left out anybody that will be affected by GBV or subjected to GBV. The right to speak to a female officer where possible, whether it be the police or any other criminal justice official. We have included that claims of self-defense by women who have been victims of violence are taken into account in investigations, prosecutions, and sentencing. We have said that evidentiary rules must not be discriminatory, and that the outdated cautionary rule, the admissibility of hearsay evidence, and the drawing of inferences from the absence of previous consistent statements or from the length of delay between when the offense took place and when the victim reported it to the police or other law enforcement officers should not be admissible. The following are also included: introduction of the complainant's sexual history in both civil and criminal proceedings. These are prohibited. Evidence of prior acts of violence, abuse, stalking, and exploitation by the perpetrator must be considered during judicial proceedings in accordance with the principles of national criminal law. Legal defenses such as honor or provocation cannot be invoked by perpetrators of violence against women to escape criminal responsibility in GBV cases, and people who perpetrate acts of violence against women and children while voluntarily under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or other substances must not be exempted from criminal responsibility. So this part also deals with the issue of prohibiting any law, customary law, or practices, or religious rule or practice from being used in GBV responses, avoiding mediation that could harm the victim, prohibiting discrimination based on nationality or lack thereof, especially when you look at refugees or asylum-seeking status, prohibiting any adverse inferences in GBV cases, such as reporting late. That should be, no, I don't know, there's something wrong here. But this relates to reporting cases late. That shouldn't attract adverse inferences and so forth. So you can see we've added so much. And the only way that you can appreciate what is included in the GBV model law is to read it, and understand it, because we just don't have the time. I need to leave time for you to actually debate these issues. You can see the amount of issues that we have put under access to justice. They are profound and they are many. Then we deal with effective responses. How do you effectively respond to GBV? I'll only go through the first explanatory part, and then the rest you just have to read. because the GBV model law sets out provisions which stimulate a quick and effective response to GBV, whether it takes place in the home, public place, public or private institution, or place of employment, thus addressing acts of gender-based violence that are about to take place or have already taken place. So it's a holistic approach that has been taken. The model law ensures that when GBV occurs, how it is reported, assessed, investigated, duly prosecuted, and decisions made and executed are done timely and expeditiously, and that the rights of the complainant victim are observed and respected at all times, and for all, irrespective of status and documentation. So you find the law includes efficient and simplified procedures. We have simplified all the procedures and processes for handling reports of GBV and internal complaints at places of work or public and private complaints with regard to reporting, receiving, assessing, investigating, and determining GBV cases and appealing such complaints to higher authorities. We've put in there the process for referring and lodging a GBV report or complaint to an appropriate authority, such as the police, victim support unit, human resource department, or human resource person dealing with GBV, or other appropriate authority or person, or statutory body or ministerial department dealing specifically with GBV matters, gender matters, children or women's affairs. We've also dealt with collaborative issues. How do you collaborate in investigations and assessments? How you do reports and complaints, and ensure consultation among appropriate authorities in so doing. So notable offenses are those dealing with the simplified procedures and the effective response and referral sections. I urge you to read these thoroughly because they contain very interesting matter, which will help you come up with similar procedures and processes when dealing with GBV cases. You can see there are so many. Part 4 then deals with prohibitions and offenses and sentencing. We help member states to craft appropriate prohibitions that can be charged on, that the courts can determine on and come up with a just decision. We also include support measures and restraints in the provisions so that they are more effective in the fight against GBV. I would especially ask you to read provisions such as prohibition of gender-based violence, how they're crafted, collusion in gender-based violence offenses, what happens where there's collusion, and how should this be dealt with is all laid down very simply. Then we provide, just so that we don't leave out anything, for other gender-based violence cases, which are many. They are attached to gender-based violence, but they can be left out if we do not specifically deal with them in the law. So you must try to ensure that all forms of gender-based violence is dealt with. Simple things like takes away the child from the lawful mother of that child after she gives birth. That's gender-based violence. Imagine the emotional effect on the mother and the child. So we have made new offenses which will attract new penalties and new ways of investigating and assessing them. We've actually put them in the model law. Prohibitions relating to gender-based violence, how the minister responsible for the criminal justice system, in consultation with other responsible ministers, should come up with sentencing policies and appropriate penalties for issues dealing with gender-based violence. And we actually guide them how to do it. All the provisions are there. Then we also put in intervention programs for perpetrators and alternative sentences. So we haven't left out the perpetrators. We've put in here provisions that the government or judicial institutions must bring about to deal with perpetrators of gender-based violence, and how they could effectively use alternative sentences to deal with these perpetrators. Then we lay out for the judiciary, because the judiciary sometimes need guidance as well, and the law should try to guide them for effective interpretation. So that not only are they looking at the common law rules, but they're also looking at the statutory rules that have been created specifically for gender-based violence. So we guide them on the factors that they must take into account when dealing with gender-based violence cases and imposing sanction in relation to the various convictions over those offenses. So we actually deal with that. Then part 7 deals with protection, prevention, and intervention measures, okay? And these, most of you are very familiar with. Notably, we provide for basic benefits and services to victims, a whole range of benefits, protection orders, restraining orders, all those we profoundly deal with them in this part. Then we look at capacity building and awareness in part 8. Obviously, you all know how important capacity building is and public awareness in dealing with GBV. It has been a weak point in most of your legislation. There's no notable provisions dealing adequately with public awareness, how you carry out public awareness, how you ensure that your communication are actually reaching the targeted audiences in order to fight GBV effectively. So we've put down all the methods, the type of evidence that you'll be looking for, the reporting of such cases, the tracking of such cases, and so forth. We've put everything there. We've also dealt quite at length with training of public officials in the handling, the management, the prosecution, and the making of decisions by the judiciary in relation to GBV cases. So we target who these people are and make sure we ensure that the government must put in place these training programs in order to enhance issues relating to gender-based violence, human rights, and what services the law have provided for victims in order to ensure that not only are they safe, but they're also aware of what their entitlements are. Then the last part deals with general issues such as information and data protection, research and development in relation to GBV cases, how you track them, how you investigate, how you deal with perpetrators, and so forth. Then we also deal in this part with financial resources and budgeting, what strategies must be put in place, what measures need to be paid for, and so forth. And here we bring in the minister responsible for finance so that liaison is directly with the minister, and the minister is also made to understand that it's essential to have finances to actually fight GBV. Then we have a whole range of enforcement and compliance provisions and regulatory issues which will come up in rules, regulations, and orders. We provide also for monitoring and evaluation and reporting in an extensive manner, how this must be done and who reporting must be done to. And that's come to the end. But as I said, it's really in your hands as legislatures to read this model law deeply, so that you are able to understand it and scrutinize legislation that is coming before you as legislator, ensuring at all times that what we've provided for in the model law has been taken on board, because it is your instrument. You originated it, you initiated, you conceptualized it, and it has come to the fore. So it's now for you to ensure its implementation, domestication in your own jurisdictions. Thank you very much, honorables, for listening to me. It's quite a lengthy thing, but I've tried.
Thank you, Madam. If indeed you have tried, and you couldn't have ended on a better note than to say that it is now over to the honorable members for them to read the model law, to understand it, in order to scrutinize all legislation that is brought before Parliament, to make sure that it is aligned to the standards and the benchmarks that are set within the model law. Once more, thank you so much for that elucid presentation. Long but worthwhile. It was the meat, it was the sole reason why this meeting has been convened. At this juncture, I wish to open up the floor for honorable members, and our deliberations must focus on the content of the model law, but also sharing where possible the context of your respective member states and member parliaments, where you see the relevance of the model law in your respective countries based on the specific legislative frameworks and any legislative gaps that exist within your parliaments. Let me not waste time, but open the floor and allow honorable members to deliberate. Honorable Vice President, do you wish to take the floor? You are muted, Vice President. Honorable Vice President, you are muted. Interpretation, are we able to communicate with the Vice President? I see the Vice President is speaking. Are we having any challenges with unmuting?
I've requested her to unmute.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just waiting on her to accept.
Okay. While we are waiting for the Vice President, are there any members that wish to take the floor? I see Honorable Talita from Botswana. You wish to have the floor again?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would like to take, to share something here, because this presentation is very, very, very good. You did very well. And about GBV, yes, this is serious, especially after COVID-19. And the cases are so high, but especially, I'll still refer myself because I'm a member of parliament from rural villages. And most of them, they suffer the GBV. And I've heard you talking about the interpretation services, especially at court, because you will see somebody not speaking Setswana. Okay, our official language is Setswana and English, and somebody who's affected on GBV not speaking Setswana or English, you know, he's going to have a problem at court because of that. Maybe they will use these two languages, but you know, I've heard you talking about the interpretation services, which is very, very good, especially to women who has been affected to GBV at the rural places. Another one which I want to talk about is especially most of the companies should have the rules of, if we want to eradicate GBV, each and every company, each and every office have to have GBV rules on the wall. That will really, really eradicate GBV. But I think the way you were presenting, it was very, very good. And also the cases of GBV, you know, you talked about the reporting, and the prosecution. You know, it's still behind. You know, I will say it's still behind. I think we have to tighten up, or we have to really work on that, which is very, very good on that. Or we have to really enforce the law on that. And we have to work really, really on that, which is very, very good. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Botswana. You see Honorable Bistok, Seychelles, and will then be followed by the Vice President, Honorable Fiarovana.
Rosie.
Honorable Bistok, you have the floor.
Yeah, Rosie. Thank you. Thank you. The presentation was very comprehensive, very, very comprehensive. And especially, I mean, I adore the definitions, which it has sort of the multiple aspects, not only from the UN system, but from all the different cultures, which is quite very good. And at the same time, I find the presentations and all the different areas that were discussed, it's very inclusive and very holistic as well. And I would like to have one clarification. I don't know, probably this SADC will sort of provide a reply. Since the document itself, all the contents and all the definitions, and it's very comprehensive, and all the member states, they have to take time to digest and present to the stakeholders for consultative purposes. How long will the time frame, it will take the time frame to be integrated by member states? So what is there a deadline, a time frame? And secondly, I was thinking when it was presented, what about the prison settings? Because I haven't heard anything much about it, especially the perpetrators, if they are uniformed men, and the rights of the female or male, but mostly female prisoners. So is there a way they can sort of provide or give or have access to such services, because their rights will be violated as well? So probably in that area, what can be done for the prison inmates, and especially those who are on remand days, they have not been sort of found guilty to be imprisoned as well. So probably if we can have a clarification on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I invite the Vice President, Honorable Fiarovana. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, de m'avoir
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I have just an observation. Thank you for the explanation. I found the presentation to be clear and holistic. There are certain points in that model law. Excuse me, the Vice President can speak closer to the mic. I can't hear properly.
Honorable Vice President, you are muted. Levi and colleagues, please note that Honorable Vice President is muted.
Unfortunately, we couldn't hear you properly.
Yes, still muted. Honorable Vice President. Maybe while we wait for the Vice President to come back, we can have further comments. Okay. I'm being advised that the Vice President had finished his intervention. Any further comments, honorable members? Tanzania? Honorable Shali, please kindly unmute.
Yes, please. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Habari?
Nzuri, asante. So, I'm on Article 3, subsection 5. The way it is written, the government shall amend any provision of its law and so forth. I was suggesting that maybe it would sound better if we say the government may, replace the word shall with may. Then again on Article 19, subsection B and D, or when it is talking about abortion, I'm asking our good consultant who presented it so well, and so well, I don't have a better word, but it was really nice and interesting. Does it mean that on D, we are going to legalize abortion, which to some countries, like in my country, is not allowed? But then on B, I did not understand when she talks about access to comprehensive and quality sexual and reproductive health service and rights. What does that rights mean, sir? Then again, on which article is that? I'm having a problem on Article 147. Am I right? Or page 147? Oh my God. What does that say? I was missing something. That was on page 68. Sorry. On Article 12, subsection 3 and 4, women have the right to refuse sexual acts, including acts with marriage and relationships. When it comes to marriage, I don't see how we can really present it. How do you refuse? In other religions, it's a sacrament. It's the right of the man. His body is yours and yours is his. Now, much as we say it is GBV, but then when it comes to marriage, I would like her to elaborate. And also on subsection 4, marriage so cohabitant or romantic or intimate relationship shall not constitute, and so forth. Other men are not romantic. Talk of their professions and what. The white collar jobs might be romantic, but when you talk of the engineers and what, they need it, they want it. May I be very honest? I have a number of them, but then I also spare time for others. But to be more holistic, I would like to say that we are going to present ours in a written form after meeting the stakeholders. That will be on 24th, if I'm not mistaken. So we are going to bring everything in written form. The few I've mentioned were the hot issues. I have a number of them I've listed, but then I also want to give others time to share their views. Thank you so much, and many thanks to the presenter, our consultant. I highly appreciate. Asante sana.
Karibu sana. Thank you very much, Honorable. We have our able consultant and Madam Secretary General present in the meeting. If there are any questions that may need to confer with the Secretary General, she's available. Honorable members, I want to close this round of questions. If there are any further questions, may we indicate by raising our hands, or you can indicate verbally so that we move towards conclusion.
There's a hand from Tanzania.
There is, okay, Honorable Kimia, Tanzania. Do you wish to take the floor? Honorable Kimia.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
Of course. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Sure.
I have also some few comments, but I would like to congratulate our consultants for a good draft. I do believe that this will help us a lot. We cannot deny that the problem is there in our society. So we believe if we incorporate this model law, will be so helpful to reduce the situation. But my advice, this law model should try to align with our culture, our value in our region, particularly African region. Some of things which have been mentioned here, it's against our culture, so it will be difficult for the member state to incorporate those issues. Example, some few issues being raised up with my fellow Tanzanian, like issue of abortion. So it will be difficult to accept this issue because abortion in our religion, whatever in our culture, we do not allow it. So you should try to handle that issues. Also, issue like homosexual guys and things like those in our society, we cannot even speak about it. So when you bring this document, let's say in our parliament, and it is indicating that we are going to give light to those people, it will be a difficult situation. So before you create this model law, you should try to think in our society, so that it can be acceptable by a lot of member states. And as I should like to indicate, in Article 11, I think, the right to life. The presenter elaborate well, part 1, Article 11, part 1, we say the person has the right to life. It means those victims, they have right to life. But when you come to part 3 of that Article 11, court shall not impose death sentence. So what does it mean? It means our court should not impose at all death sentence, or only death sentence related to, or only death sentence related to GBV, because in our law we have we cannot impose death sentence. So you should elaborate about it. And another thing I would like to indicate, okay, sorry. Another thing I would like to indicate is Article 16, especially in subsection 2.
Just a moment. Honorable Shali, could you mute, please?
Oh, thank you.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me now properly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Another issue I want to raise up is in Article 16, especially paragraph 2. A victim shall not be deported or subjected to other punishment action. Of course, it is good for those people who are refugees to get their rights in case of GBV, but this article maybe will be as a loophole for those to not to get their punishment. So what I suggest here, those people, they should get assistance if they encounter GBV, but this GBV on their side should not permit them or should not give them the other right, like what is indicated in this paragraph 2. So you should try to phrase it well in paragraph 2. We believe we need them to get their right, their assistance, but due to GBV, they should not be allowed to do unlawful issue in the other people countries. Okay, the last issue I would like to raise is Article 3, especially in paragraph 5. Can you go back to Article 3, paragraph 5? Article 3, paragraph 5. Okay. In the first sentence, the government shall amend any provision of its law. I think this is a very big commitment, because we have already seen there is a lot of misunderstanding with our original laws of our constitution. So you cannot abide us with this shall. Maybe it will be indicated like the government may. So will be our option after understanding if this will be an advantage in our society or not. You cannot tell us shall, because I have already indicated some weakness of this, so you cannot give us this shall in our law. So it is like it is must, we must amend it. So those are some few comments on my side, but it should be taken that this is my own opinion and not my government opinion. Our comment, as mentioned by Shari, will put it into writing and will submit on 24th of this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kimia, for that comprehensive submission. Maybe while I have the floor, before we hand over to our resource person to respond, I wish to indicate that honorable members are free to submit any written submissions on the email that we have shared in the inbox, which is gbv@sadcpf.org. At this juncture, allow me to hand over the floor to Madame Eva to tackle the questions. Should you wish to confer with the SG, please proceed and do so. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I'll defer all the questions on reproductive health rights to the SG, but I may quickly just go through the honorable members' specific comments. And may I just say thank you very much, honorable members, for the commendation on the presentation and the model law. I'm most appreciative, and I'm sure SADC PF is also very appreciative for all the hard work that they put in coming up with the model law. Thank you very much. On Botswana, yes, we appreciate Botswana's stance, especially in relation to the rural areas. And I'm happy that you are happy that we've put into the model law issues of interpretation services and other matters that will actually help the Swana villager. So we shall look more into it and see how much more we can build on such a foundation. Honorable Rosie Bistoket, I love her, the way she says, I adore the definitions. They are so very wide. We appreciate that, and we will take note that if we need to improve further on them, we shall do so. She raised a very important issues about inmates. We haven't really focused on specific subject or targeted victims. We've drafted it in a very generalized manner. But I think for certain areas like inmates, prisoners, I think we need to take a step down and relook at some of those provisions and see whether we can actually target certain groups that may be more vulnerable and may escape the protections. So one of them are the inmates. So we can assure you, the inmates, the prisoners and remandees, Honorable will assure you that we relook at that area and see how best we can deal with the issue. Unfortunately, our dear Vice President, I didn't get the question. I know he was making an observation, but because of the connectivity issues, we did not capture. Honorable Sali from Tanzania raised specific issues, and both the honorables from Tanzania are concerned with the mandatory and the discretionary legal rules that we are using. The model law, first I must say, is a golden standard. It's the ultimate or optimal standards we want to see member states achieve in the fight against GBV. As you know, the model law is only persuasive in nature. It's persuasive in nature. No member state is forced to adopt it, or indeed use all the provisions in the model law to be incorporated in your own national laws. You are not stopped or forced to do anything, This model law has been given to you as the best standards, locally in some regional member states, countries, internationally and continentally. So we've put together best international standards. So it's up to you to see where and at what point you want to domesticate the provisions of the model law. Obviously, as a gold standard, we can't drop it. It has to remain at that standard. And those who can fulfill the gold standard, it's well and good. We all know, even in Zambia, you can't even talk about lesbianism, homosexuality, and what? You will be killed. But that's the gold standard for us to try and achieve. How we'll do it is another issue. So the model law, you can take it progressively. You won't do it all at once. You can do it as and when your own organic systems and societies grow. The model law will grow with your needs. So that's how I answer the question of mandatory and discretionary, and those issues which seemingly are against your customs, traditions, and religions. So it's really up to you how you'll embrace the model law. So I think basically those were the issues on culture and from Tanzania. Let me see if I've left out anything. Difficult abortion, all these are reproductive, shall not impose. Okay, on the issue of the death sentence, again, there's many countries who actually constitutionally provide that no death sentence can be imposed. Again, it's the golden standard. And you shall progressively deal with issues relating to the imposition of the death penalty. It's a hard push, but something which we will deal with, all of us in the end, even including Zambia. We have to deal with it and face it. Are we God? To take a life, even for another life. We'll have to face it at one point. So progressively, you can deal with it, honorables, as and when you think it's the right time. So basically, I think I've dealt with all the issues which were very similar. On the romantic relationships, I'll leave it to you, Honorable Shali, to actually work it out. And the issue of whether you've got a right to say no to your husband, because traditionally you have to say yes. But in most countries now and in the modern world, I've got a right to say no. If that day I don't want, I don't want. So don't force me. It's GBV. Anyway, basically the whole issue here is to the binding effects of the model law. What is the model law? It's just a tool to help you to develop your own law. It's the golden standard, the highest standards that you can achieve. If you want to achieve it quickly, you can adopt all the provisions. If you want to do it progressively, you can adopt some provisions, you leave out others. Remember when I was explaining in the morning, I said it must be specific to your own jurisdictions. You can introduce those specificities. You are not forced to do anything. So let me now defer to the Secretary General, and she'll also talk about the golden standard, because that's the policy of the SADC PF. SG, may I defer to you now?
Thank you, honorable members. Thank you very much. Let me join in congratulating the draftsperson for such an eloquent and comprehensive presentation. We are quite pleased with her submissions and the manner in which we are progressing in this regard. Let me also appreciate the honorable members' input. I must say that I am quite happy that we're having this level of contribution from the honorable members. And I also appreciate the fact that you've committed further to give us written contributions. These will be very, very important for us to receive before the tabling of the model law. And let me just request that if you have really failed, submit your comments the first week of October in writing so that we are able to take them along as we sift through others and do the incorporation process. Otherwise, if the process has not allowed you to consult further, during the 50th plenary assembly, before you attend the session, it will be helpful for you to submit so that the drafter is able to look at them before as we go through the model law, article by article towards adoption. Now, turning to the questions that have been tabled, honorable members, let me start with the easy one. The easy one that has been discussed is the whole issue of, these issues. We have to look at the diversity of the countries. We completely also appreciate that the landscape in our countries, the legal landscape in our countries is very, very varied. And these are some of the findings that our researchers came up with when they looked at what obtains in the SADC region. And therefore, that automatically means that it will determine, each country will determine where they are and which issues they're able to tackle with at a given time. The model law does not become law on top of your existing laws. The model law does not dictate in any way that because you accept that this should be the gold standard for any person or for any issue that you're dealing with, that it must happen immediately. That is not what it means for you to adopt the model law. Secondly, this is not a consensus law. It is not a bill for X country. We therefore have difficulty aligning what Botswana wants against what Namibia wants, what South Africa wants against Seychelles, because then this will not be a model, it will be a consensus law. And would like for you to appreciate what the drafter has indicated, that this is the gold standard, which we appreciate that it will take us all different methods and timeframes for us to arrive at that particular process where we are ready to consider a particular provision within the model law as provided. But as the forum, we are futuristic. We've looked ahead and said, but this is where the evidence points us to, that you cannot afford to have discriminatory practices, that you cannot afford to exclude certain populations, that if you are going to tackle certain ills around public health, socioeconomic, or democracy, you must be comprehensive in your approach. And this is why we are looking at something that is comprehensive, like a model, in the manner of the model law that we are putting together. So, honorable members, this is not going to be an imposition on any country. At a given time, the countries will be able to take what is relevant for them at a given time. The other issue that was asked was the whole issue of what is this right? I know that that question was not complete. The issue was not complete, and it will take shape in various countries in the manner that they have defined this. We know that there are limitations where others say, let us just talk about sexual health. Let us exclude the issue of rights because you are trying to sneak in other populations that we don't want. But when we talk about rights in this context, we are just saying all of us are born with rights. When we come to earth, we have the right to life, the right to education, but we also appreciate that different constitutions in our country make what do you call it? All these rights are not self-executing. The socio-political rights, among others, that we then exclude certain rights because we feel this one we cannot afford to our populations. It's got nothing to do with sneaking in anything else. It is just to say these are indivisible, and this is what our people are born with, that which as duty bearers, we must allow them as right holders to exercise. I want to put it simply in that manner and not go further into what it could mean in a certain context. I hope that I've been able to cover at least the breadth of some of the questions that we have. These are similar questions that we also reach and find in various interparliamentary bodies. And this will continue to be work in progress. However, we continue to encourage members to be inclusive. When we talk about universal health coverage says no one should be left behind. Whether it is through a service or anything that when you talk about our sustainable development goals on health and well-being, and as well as the roadmap for health commitments in Africa, as contained in Agenda 2063, we cannot exclude or look the other way when we talk about rights. Let me just conclude by saying, even when we are supposed to legislate or look at issues of COVID-19, it should be treatment which is free for all without exclusion. And therefore, this is where you as members of parliament come in. When you raise budgets or invest in your populations, it must be done for everyone without exception. When we talk about accountability or oversight, where we seek measures for governments to protect our people, we don't say you leave this one out and this one out. If they're all Tanzanians, they must be covered equally and be respected and given the rights that we have committed to as sovereign states. And I believe that this will continue to be something that we talk about, that we learn from, and as we gather surveillance data on who's affected and not affected, this is where you then begin to tip the scales to look at how do you identify those who should be priority. When infections are rising in our prisons, we should look at evidence and say, what is the cost of this? Whose rights are we leaving out over the others? I'll use a simple example around prison that was raised by Honorable Shale from Tanzania. A lot of times in the past, we used to believe that if you are a prisoner, you should rot there, and that if you are a prisoner, certain rights should be taken away from you. But we have learned over time that good public health equals good. Who can finish that one for me? Because at the end of the day, they move from prison to the population. And therefore, where we say we are not going to deal with these people, we are not going to give these other ones certain rights that they should be having, we end up in problems with certain diseases. I hope that in that detailed scenario, I've been able to to plant a seed in terms of how we should look at the issue of rights in a manner that allows us to be universal and lead as parliaments in a manner that is refined and is evidence-based. I thank you, Madam. I believe that I've tried to tackle those issues in terms of the level of support and the vision that we should have as independent parliaments in our region, with a clear mandate of what is it that we want to achieve: to save life, to give people health, to educate our people, or to circumvent others within those groups. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for those observations, remarks, which concludes the session in terms of the responses from the honorable members. At this juncture, allow me to invite Mr. Stanley Nyamaninti, the CEO of SADC Lawyers Association, to deliver concluding and solidarity remarks. Over to you, Mr. Nyamaninti.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kurasha. Thank you very much for your steering of the program, but also to recognize the presence of the honorable parliamentarians, the chair of SADC PF, as well as the Secretary General and our presenter today, who gave us a very elaborate presentation of the model law, and thank you very much for that. Coming myself from the legal profession, I should say that this is a heartwarming effort. The model law, from what we could see being unpacked, is based on principles, and it is a living document. It really answers, questions about everyday existence for ordinary citizens who find life hard in ways that we take for granted simply because we were created differently. And I think it's a clarion call to all of us to change the way not only that we think, not only that we legislate, because one of the key principles of law, your honorables, is that it should work for all. It should make sure that at the end of the day, those women that Honorable Talita was talking about from Botswana, who are trying to find employment and are sexually harassed, those children who cannot access education are able to access it. Yes, it is for progressive realization, because in your constitutions, socio-economic rights are for progressive realization, unlike civil and political rights, which are peremptory. But we still think that the scourge of GBV, in terms of principle, is a fundamental human right, because our societies are only as strong as the weakest and most vulnerable members. So we salute this effort by SADC PF to really search deep down in the souls of SADC and its citizens, and to understand and present the case that human rights are interdependent, they are indivisible, and they are universal. What this means is that without achieving these standards for our most vulnerable, our democracies remain frail and they remain weak, and our processes of participation remain exclusionary. One of the key important aspects that we realize today is that there is key guidance to key stakeholders that is incorporated in this model law, and I would like to applaud the drafter in this case. We were part of the drafting process as the legal profession. We had our own chance to feast on the content of this model law, and the only comment that I could hear is that we wish that this could be escalated to the continental level, because it really represents the aspects that key stakeholders are required to follow. It leverages on the region's best resources in guiding progressive lawmaking and reform. And we believe that the methodology also respects the diversity of the region and is inclusive at every stage. I could hear the Madam Secretary General and the drafter pleading with all of you to bring in more input. The door is not closed. And this kind of inclusivity in terms of the methodology is one of the most reassuring aspects, which we hope will promote the buy-in from all stakeholders. Now, we also recognize that the SADC PF is undergoing institutional transformation, of which we do really congratulate you on your consistency, on your persistence in ensuring that a legislative assembly is realized in the SADC region. This is very important. And when I look at your history and when I look at the history of other legislative assemblies from other regional economic communities, it is as if it is for a reason that there was much of this delay and you did not take the time to sit on your hands, but you were preparing, and adequately so, to come up with a compendium of progressive legislation that is in itself soft law, but enables us to adopt more progressive legislative frameworks. We as the legal profession look forward to a day when not only can we have the good laws, but we can take them to adequate and well-equipped with jurisdiction platforms at regional level to help our citizens realize their rights in terms of this law. Now, one of the things that I will say in conclusion is simply to say that the Sustainable Development Goals speak to equal access to justice. And this is one of the key measures that we realize and can produce as a deliverable in the SADC region as a step towards achieving that target, helping our policymakers, helping decision makers, and being participatory in solution seeking. And I think this is a new approach that must be applauded. I want to recognize the special capacity and the unique convening capacity of the SADC PF. You see how it is important that you can convince state actors and non-state actors over an agenda that is mutually progressive. There are so many things that we could fight over, that many people choose to use resources to conflict about, but you have chosen deliberately to find those areas, which I think are endless, where we can cooperate and improve the lives of our citizens. And in that regard, I congratulate you. We pledge our eternal commitment and cooperation in the region and at national levels, and we look forward to further progressive engagements. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyamanindi, for those deep reflections. We cherish that the SADC Lawyers Association could spare the time to be with our parliamentarians. This interface is very important. While you are the custodians of the legal knowledge, they are the home of lawmaking and of social contract. And therefore, the collaboration between our two institutions must necessarily result in us achieving more than we would if we were working outside the scope of collaboration. At this juncture, we have come to the end of the meeting. I think it has been a long day, and I wish to thank honorable members for sparing time to attend the meeting, and all the stakeholders. Also want to thank our interpreters who made it possible for us to be able to converse in our diversity. Thank you very much. Stay safe, and we will meet during the 8th to 18th of October, when we have our committee session ahead of the 50th plenary assembly. In the absence of any further announcements, I wish to indicate that we have come to the end of our meeting. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you very much for being a good moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Stanley.
Welcome, Madam Jala, and thank you very much as well.
Thank you very, very much for your closing remarks. They were really enlightening.
I hope we will have a chance to meet and hopefully reflect more.
Thank you. Hopefully.
Goodbye. Yes.
Certainly. Okay.
Sure.
Ronald, kindly terminate.
Sure.